I'm Janice Fine. I'm the director of the program on immigration and democracy here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your patience. And I just wanted to say a little bit before we introduce Congresswoman Clarke. We're very excited to have Congresswoman Yvette Clarke joining us to discuss the future of immigrant America. Before I introduce her, I want to say just a little bit about Immigrant New Jersey and the Eagleton program on immigration and democracy. What you might not realize about New Jersey, or maybe everyone here does, is that New Jersey's population of 1.75 million foreign-born individuals is the 6th largest in the nation after California, New York, Texas, Florida, and Illinois. But only 2 other states, California and New York, have a higher proportion of foreign-born population than New Jersey. So this is sort of a continuing story in New Jersey of migration. And our state is all the better for it. So I just want to say a little bit more. 43.5% are from Latin America, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. 30% are from Asia, 20.4% from Europe, 4.7% from Africa. So the interesting thing about New Jersey is in contrast to a lot of the other states, in New Jersey we don't so much have one dominant immigrant group, right? We have this really interesting mixture of migrants from all over the world. And most of us who teach at Rutgers, we know this to be true, right? We see it in the faces of our students who are Polish, who are Russian, who are Slavic, who are Cuban, who are from all over Africa, and also from Philippines and from Southeast Asia. I mean, from everywhere. It's very inspiring, exciting to teach at Rutgers because of its incredible diversity. The top 3 countries of origin. Anybody know what the top country of origin in New Jersey is?
Mexico.
Italy.
India.
I got Mexico, I got Italy, India, sold to the man. Yeah, that's right. So the top country of origin here is India, 9.7%. Mexico, 5.9%. So here's another thing just to chew on, is that of the total foreign-born population in New Jersey, 32% came here in the 90s. So the cool thing is that we all know, right, that there's a whole migration story of the golden era in New Jersey from the 1880s to the 1920s. That's the story we know. But I think what we are less familiar with is that in the 1990s and the aughts, there was a huge influx of immigrants into the state of New Jersey. And in part, I think that's what some of the in Yiddish we would say tsuris, right? Some of the issues, right, are that in a lot of ways we don't acknowledge that there's been more migration in the United States between 1990 and 2010 than there ever was in the history of the country, right? And that's a really important fact that we need to grapple with. Just a little bit more, the number of foreign-born workers in New Jersey grew by 45% between 1990 and 2000. And again, 25% between 2000 and 2005. And now, the percentage of foreign-born in New Jersey in the working population is 25%. Foreign-born workers are overrepresented. You know, think about the hourglass, right? At the top and at the bottom of the economy. More than 40% of our chemists, but also our nursing aides, our physicians, and our janitors are foreign-born. Over 40% of the state's scientists and the state's engineers are foreign-born. And entrepreneurs who are foreign-born are responsible for 1 out of 5 businesses. So this just gives you a sense of how incredible this is. I don't want to belabor this because I know we're running behind. Let me just say that the Eagleton program on immigration and democracy is a growing and dynamic program. We'd love for all of you to be involved. I'll just tell you quickly about 2 signature projects. One is called the Rutgers Immigrant Infrastructure Mapping Project. And that's been a project that we've been doing that's studying the role that fraternal organizations and nonprofit organizations and all kinds of different groups are playing in helping newcomers to New Jersey become economically, socially, and politically situated in New Jersey. So that's a whole project that's studying immigrant demographics in New Jersey and the role of civil society. The other project is called Citizenship Rutgers. And that's a project that is helping the over 500,000 people in New Jersey who are eligible to become citizens to naturalize. And that's a really exciting project. It was inspired and trained. We got training from the City University of New York who taught us about a great project that they started there. So now, across all 3 Rutgers campuses, we have been working to help naturalize legal permanent residents who are going to go through the process. And you might or might not know, maybe your family, maybe you yourself have naturalized. You know that it can be an intimidating process. It can be an expensive process. And so part of what we try to do is make that as easy as it can be. So it's literally like a one-stop shop. With Ed Rubin here, who's one of our very, very skilled senior immigration attorneys and trains our attorneys. We have a staff of about 100 volunteers who are immigration attorneys, law students, and then undergrads. And together, when somebody walks in the door, our goal is that by the time they leave, if they don't have a complex case, they walk out with all their paperwork done, and all they have to do is write the check. Right? That's what Citizenship Rutgers is about. So in the spirit of Eagleton, of course I'm going to try to sign you up. If you are open to volunteering for us, we will find you a role. We have 2 Citizenship Rutgers events coming up right around the corner. Hyacinth, do you have the flyer? I actually didn't write, I don't have the dates in front of me. April 14th. What, Sarah? 14th and 29th. So it's this weekend in Newark, and then the 29th, a Sunday, here in New Brunswick. So please participate with us. So let me just say finally that we are so glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming. And this event would not have been possible, and we would not be able to do what we do without the leadership of John Weingart and Ruth Mandel, who are the leaders of the Institute. So if they could just wave and say hello. Thank you so much. And there's a great, wonderful staff of people here that do incredible work. And I want to introduce you to Hyacinth Miller. It's because of Hyacinth that the Congresswoman has come to be with us today. So I'm going to introduce Hyacinth, who's going to introduce her friend and her colleague, the Congresswoman. In November of 2011, Hyacinth Miller joined the Eagleton staff as research associate for both the Eagleton Program on Immigration and Democracy and the Center for American Women in Politics. She's also adjunct faculty in the School of Arts and Sciences, Department of Latino and Hispanic Caribbean Studies. Prior to working for Rutgers University, Hyacinth was the interim executive director of the Association of Paroling Authorities International, the only group solely dedicated to providing services for parole board chairs in the U.S. and abroad. She also served as a criminal justice program associate for JET Foundation, where her work focused on designing funding strategies to encourage and implement reform in the areas of parole, probation, mandatory sentencing, death penalty, and immigration. Before her foray into philanthropy, Hyacinth spent more than 10 years lobbying in government affairs. She worked as an analyst, lobbyist, and PAC treasurer for the New York Life Insurance Company and served as a staffer to Congressman Gregory Meeks, New York City Council members Una Clarke and Lloyd Henry, and New York State Senator Malcolm Smith. She received her bachelor's in political science and Africana studies from Brooklyn College, and as both an APSA and NSF fellow, pursued graduate studies in political science at the University of Chicago. She has written and presented conference papers on the subject of West Indians in the United States and on the issue of multiple citizenship. We have had an overflow crowd here because of Hyacinth's work and because of Randy Chmielowski. So she can't be here tonight, but we wanted to thank her too. Hyacinth.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the introduction, Janice, and thank you guests for attending. Congresswoman Clarke was first elected to Congress in November 2006. She currently sits on the Homeland Security and Small Business Committees and has previously served on the Education and Labor Committee. In addition to her committee work and work with the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus, and the Women's Caucus, Congresswoman Clarke has sponsored 9 bills in the 110th Congress, which include the Global Sexual and Reproductive Health Act, the Haitian Emergency Life Protection Act, the Expanding Opportunities for Small Businesses Act, and the Adjusting for Income Disparity Act. Prior to her election to Congress, Representative Clarke served on the New York City Council. She succeeded her mother, former City Councilwoman Una S.T. Clarke, making them the first mother-daughter succession in the history of the council. As a council member, she was able to pass common sense legislation such as the potty law, which required the city to provide more female restrooms. I'm sure this was inspired by the Congresswoman having to wait yet again on those oh-so-long lines at the women's restroom while watching men come and go from theirs. I've known Congresswoman Clarke for more than 15 years, and what her bio is unable to convey is her passion, her devotion, and her resolute commitment to the people whom she serves. Y. Diane Clarke, which is what I call her, has always worked for the community despite being lured by the private sector. As a first-generation American, otherwise known as a Jamaican, she understands that she is in a unique position to provide a voice for those from the immigrant community, not only in Brooklyn, but across the country. She has been a staunch advocate of the DREAM Act legislation, which would provide undocumented students a pathway to legalization, thereby making them eligible for in-state tuition, and the provision and extension of temporary protected status to those immigrants from countries that have suffered natural and/or man-made disasters. She has also been on the front lines demanding the adherence to and expansion of regulations which govern how the U.S. treats women and children, asylees, and refugees. Congresswoman Clarke now holds the very same seat once held by the first Caribbean-born African-American elected to Congress, the late Honorable Shirley Chisholm. Though she has large shoes to fill, Y. Diane Clarke has thus far proven to be up for the challenge. Her activism, humanity, and integrity will enable her to continue to be an outspoken advocate for those in her district, across the nation, and throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Congresswoman Yvette Clarke.
Thank you, Hyacinth. Let me first of all just thank Hyacinth for that wonderful introduction and to say what a very virtuous crowd we have here. You may want to know why I call you virtuous. Well, if patience is a virtue, then each and every one of you certainly can attribute that characteristic to yourselves. To Ruth Mandel and John Weingart of the Eagleton Institute, thank you so much. To Debbie Walsh, Director of the Center for American Women in Politics, and to Janice Fine, let me thank you all for extending a hearty welcome to me and for arranging that I can have this conversation here on campus today. It's a pleasure to be here with you at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. I want to again thank Rutgers University and the Eagleton Institute of Politics for hosting what I hope will be a very engaging forum. I'd also like to again recognize my sister by another mister, recognize Hyacinth Miller for working closely with my office and ensuring that I would actually make it here today. And I can tell you with the blow-by-blow calls we were making en route here, she definitely followed through. We're going to discuss the future of immigrant America today, and I think that it really depends on how we as a nation define ourselves as a nation, one, and if we define ourselves as an immigrant America, are we truly upholding the values that our nation was founded on? The fact is, we are a nation of immigrants. And the more we continue to remember our history, the more we can put the immigration debate into perspective. Just by show of hands, how many in the audience are first-generation immigrants who came to this country looking for the American dream? By show of hands. Okay. Now, how many of you in this audience come from immigrant backgrounds or are the direct beneficiaries of those who came to this country to access a better life? Is that everyone? All right, the last question. Everyone in the room should have raised their hands since we pretty much all come from immigrant backgrounds, unless, of course, you're Native American, then I'll let you slide. I, like many of you, some of you in this room, consider myself a first-generation American. My mother and father came from the island nation of Jamaica, West Indies. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and filled with generations of immigrant families that add to the richness and diversity of the borough of Brooklyn. Right now, I represent the 11th Congressional District of New York, which encompasses a large portion of central Brooklyn. It was my own upbringing and exposure to first and second generation immigrants that have helped shape my understanding of how we can tackle our current broken immigration system. Nearly 39% of our residents are foreign-born from Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and especially the Caribbean, making up roughly 21% of the foreign-born population in the 11th Congressional District that I currently represent. In fact, about 66,000 Hispanic immigrants have settled in my district and make up less than 10% of the foreign-born population. Approximately 47% of the immigrant population that settled in the district between 1980 and 2008 have yet to obtain naturalized citizenship. They're currently legal permanent residents, and some have other legal visa designations or are simply undocumented. More and more of these individuals and families are being challenged by our enforcement-dominated, southern border-focused, dysfunctional immigration system. That's my characterization of it. For this reason, I've been working diligently behind the scenes in Congress to make comprehensive immigration reform a reality for all. I've been especially committed to expanding the face of immigration, alleviating the unfair burden placed on our Latino sisters and brothers. We all understand that this is a broken immigration system, but it's our system, and it affects all of us, immigrant and native alike. In order to fix our broken immigration system and establish true comprehensive reform, we must first never forget that our American heritage has been transformed throughout our land by what New York City Mayor David Dinkins used to call the gorgeous mosaic. The diversity in our collective history has allowed us to embrace those coming to our shores determined to strengthen, build, and contribute to a better and stronger nation. In this regard, we have an obligation to make sure that the immigration reform debate mirrors the diverse faces, the diversity of America. The diversity and effectiveness of the immigration reform debate will heavily rely on its support. During the 111th Congress, my esteemed colleague, Congressman Luis Gutierrez of Illinois, who is Puerto Rican, I want people to know that because he has citizenship by virtue of being having been born in one of the U.S. territories. But he is not taking the debate for granted. And he worked with Solomon Ortiz of Texas. They drafted and introduced H.R. 4321, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform for America's Security and Prosperity Act of 2009. And it is imperative that advocacy groups, religious leaders, individual stakeholders at every level of government, and all of you come together to support this type of legislation and champion true reform. Well, I'm going to depart a little bit from my prepared remarks just to share a couple of things, because for too long we've allowed fear to drive the debate around comprehensive immigration reform, which is very interesting given the fact that most of us have become accustomed to a very diverse nation. And I say most of us primarily on the East Coast, right? So the middle of the country, not as much. And certainly certain parts of the Southwest are being challenged by the fact that they border Mexico. But the reality is, if we truly look at it, we have all been exposed to individuals, whether it is the diversity of individuals who came from Eastern Europe or Western Europe. We have all been raised with an immigrant population resident amongst us. One of the challenges we face as a nation right now has to do with our nation's productivity. How do we emerge economically as a force to be reckoned with when we negate the talents that we have amongst us? I believe that were we to fix our immigration system, so much of what we're concerned about, whether it's entitlements, as they call it, I call it the social compact, that is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, becomes a whole nother equation. Because now we're bringing many more individuals, their talents, their expertise, whether it is as entrepreneurs, which is oftentimes the case, or as workers, into the economic stream and life of our civil society. We make it possible for second generation to go on to build off of whatever that immigrant household has been able to establish in our civil society. And we oftentimes find that particularly immigrant families are less likely, when given an opportunity, to be dependent upon the system just out of pride, just as a matter of pride. And so we can really work at debunking a lot of the misinformation out there about the trend that is immigrant, that is immigration. Because we have all seen how generation after generation, it has been that combination of what I call longtime stakeholders and the new immigrant influence that have brought creativity, innovation, to the building of communities, to the re-strengthening of infrastructure, and certainly to entrepreneurship, which is the cornerstone of the growth and development of our civil society. So let me go back to my remarks by saying that the comprehensive immigration reform legislation focuses on alleviating the backlogs of family-based immigration, which is typically how most communities grow through immigration. That is, someone from the family comes to the United States. They could be coming as foreign students, like my mother did, who then went back, married her sweetheart. He got a scholarship. He comes over as a foreign student. As foreign students, they become educated. They decide they want to raise their family. Boom, bang, my brother and I are born. We're here in the United States. And during their time, my parents came in the 50s. You could actually use your children born in the United States to adjust your status as a student. And so that is how my parents went from being foreign students to residents of the United States. They didn't do too bad. They have one daughter in Congress. They have another son who works for WABC TV. They both became educated. My mother was a former councilwoman. And so I know that they are not an anomaly to what can happen when communities embrace one another, when we enjoy and bring with us the value of family and giving back to our civil society. And that is what I believe is the typical immigrant story. And we need to be advocates, those who will tell those stories, so that we don't become overwhelmed by those who would want to make us fearful that either something will be taken from us or someone will be taking something that is rightfully ours, when as a civil society, there's enough for each and every one. And with each individual comes that capacity, that ability to expand the dimensions, the domain, through which our nation prospers. I was instrumental in getting some of the language within the CIR, which is the Comprehensive Immigration Reform ASAP bill, which would basically reinstate judicial review among criminal immigration proceedings. Why is that important? Why is judicial reform important? Judicial review. Well, there are many individuals who come to the United States and they become residents of the United States. And as kids, and I can tell you from my own experience in school, most children don't know one child from the other. We're not walking around asking each other our status, right? So kids are kids. And if you're like kids in Brooklyn, you're looking for how close to the line you can walk without going over it and having your parents called, right? So you may decide on one particular day, this is the day to play hooky from school, and on the way to Coney Island, we're going to jump the turnstile. It may happen. It may happen. Children get caught. They get arrested. One kid's a citizen. The other kid's a resident. 20 years later, this kid is about to be like the greatest things, it has become the greatest thing since sliced bread. The resident. Travels, comes back to the United States, bells and whistles go off. And why is that? That child jumped the turnstile 30 years ago. And now that child is sitting in detention waiting to be deported from the United States of America, forfeiting residency, not understanding the magnitude of what that means. This is a law currently on the books and being enforced in the United States of America. And so we have a lot of individuals who are scheduled for deportation who, for all intents and purposes, the nation, which is their nation of origin or nation of birth, is an unfamiliar land to them. They never really lived there. And if we can have judicial review as part of our comprehensive immigration reform, then someone with some sense can take a look at this and say, you know, this was a youthful indiscretion. Most kids, you know, get a slap on the wrist for this. It doesn't mean that they have to go back to where their forefathers came from as a result of doing something like this. That's why judicial review is so critical and why I believe it's a very important component of the comprehensive immigration reform bill. Right now, Washington has been operating in a very politically motivated environment. With the great partisan divide taking place, it is fair to say that comprehensive immigration reform will not be debated on the floor. Instead, we see partisan legislative measures that would strengthen penalties on the undocumented, favoring one group of immigrants over the other, overcrowding and exacerbating human rights violations within the detention system, and intentionally separating families, which continuously avoids efficient pathways to citizenship. So we are moving in the opposite direction right now. And I think that there will be a story that will be part of our history as a nation that talks about this period of time where Americans really stepped away from those values that we've always held so closely, and that the rest of us were complicit by our own silence with what was taking place. As we all know, our broken immigration system affects many, particularly the youth, our young people. Unfortunately, there's a group of young people who were brought to this country under no choice of their own that are here undocumented. As a result, young adults are facing the threat of deportation every day. to a country many of them have never known nor had a choice to leave, and they are forced into what we call immigration purgatory, whereby the opportunities to obtain higher education or gainful employment are curtailed by their immigrant status. Unfortunately, many of these kids reside in my district. The DREAM Act is a pivotal legislation that provides a pathway to citizenship for these young people. On December 8, 2010, the House of Representatives passed the DREAM Act. Unfortunately, the Senate failed to gain the 60 votes needed to bring the Develop, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act up for a vote, aka DREAM Act. On May 12, 2011, in the 112th Congress, Senators Dick Durbin and Harry Reid and Robert Menendez reintroduced the DREAM Act, but unfortunately to no avail. It is unfortunate because many communities across the nation have nurtured these young people as our own, investing in their academic and social futures. And it's time for us to fully integrate these beneficiaries of the DREAM Act, utilizing their talents and expertise to enhance our country's state of greatness. Don't you agree? Yes. Just checking. The loss of the DREAM Act keeps kids, the loss of the DREAM Act has bleak future implications. As young people ourselves, not providing a legal pathway to citizenship will be detrimental to their futures. And, you know, we all have to think about our years of productivity. Think about it. A young person, 18 today, 10 years from now, 28. 20 years from now, 38. You know, and so on. Imagine waiting 20 years for something to happen in terms of legislation so that ultimately you can give this nation your all. You know, you've been waiting since you're 20 years old to really fully contribute, use all of your talent, your skill, and your expertise. You're waiting 10 years more, and you're 30 now. And now, you know, those years of youth that you could have used to really integrate yourself into the civil society, into the employment stream, you never regained those years. You know, it's like many of us in today's society who unfortunately were hit with the downturn in the economy. You know, you may have left the workforce and you're 47 today, and you're still looking for a job. 3 years later, you're 50. You're trying to get that job, get your foot back into the mainstream of the employment or even starting your own business. Most of us are looking forward to retiring by 65. You're trying to get your stronghold and build and accrue, you know, benefits and Social Security for that matter. But your time is truncated by a broken system because you're never given an opportunity to walk in the door and make it right with your neighbors. So because many of these kids are educated, there's a future tax base that is being wasted. Those who are so concerned about the deficit and budget futures should take a good look at the potential within this group. The talent pool is just wasting, and we are threatening to deport the future of our nation. Lastly, nothing concerns me more than the issue of the states who are dealing with illegal immigration on their own terms. As you may know, SB 1070 and HB 56, enacted by Arizona and Alabama respectively, are egregious laws that exacerbate the problem more than addressing it. These laws that create an atmosphere of fear and discrimination are really dangerous. That is why I teamed up with many of my colleagues to take a stand against these laws through an amicus brief. These laws breed racial profiling, disrespect for the jurisdiction of the federal government. They violate human rights and won't fix the real issue of our broken immigration system. I had an opportunity to go to Alabama when their law was passed. And let me tell you how deep this law is, because I don't think most people understand the magnitude of what has been passed by Alabama's legislation. Essentially, if an immigrant student, undocumented, were to go to a library to request a library card, they have to certify to the librarian that they are here legally. If that librarian gives that student a library card without making sure that that student is here legally, that the liability of the law rests with the librarian, so that the librarian could actually face charges for not checking that person's immigration status. That's how deep it gets. Can you imagine? And so basically they're cutting off every single lifeline that those individuals would have. The idea is to generate so much fear and panic among the immigrant population that, I guess in Alabama's case, they'll go back where they came from. They don't go back where they came from. They make their way to my district, a safe haven. That's what they do. That's what they do. But just imagine what that means. You know, I mean, what are we saying as a civil society when we, take things to those extremes, and when we sit back and we don't say much about it? That's why your voice is important. Your state and local officials need to see you in person and hear your voice just as much as Congress does. Just as Coney 2012 and the Trayvon Martin cases swept through the internet, bringing awareness and garnering support throughout the world, the same needs to be done with the issue of immigration in our nation. I want to encourage you all to get involved, to act. This involves you, it involves me, it involves us, it involves our future just as much as it does the individual immigrant. I leave you with this. Never forget that if we turn our backs on those law-abiding contributors to our civil society that come to our shores embracing the American dream, that labor in rebuilding our great nation, strengthening our economy, and serve honorably in our military, then we're really turning our back on ourselves. I want to thank you all for extending the invitation, and I want to open the floor to any questions, any comments you may have, any testimonials you may want to give about your experiences. But I want to again thank the Institute for making it possible for us to have this conversation, because I think it's a really important one. It's a 21st century one, and one that our children and grandchildren will want to know that we grappled with and that we made a difference with during our time. So thank you all very much. Yes.
Make sure to speak into the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have a dramatic and poignant immigration situation unfolding in a neighboring town, Highland Park, right now, where the Reformed Church of Highland Park has become a sanctuary church for Indonesian refugees who came here in the late 90s, fleeing persecution, and now the government wants to deport them. And they came here on tourist visas and were not advised that they needed to file for asylum.
Yeah.
And so they were sort of inherited by this extraordinary minister in Highland Park, when he was called to the church in 2001. And he advised them to register, to come out of the shadows and register with the government as they were legally required to do, because they came from a primarily Muslim country of Indonesia, although they happened to be Christians. And to file for asylum petitions, but these petitions were turned down because they were now over the one-year filing deadline. So in 2009, the government came after them and deported 37 of them, and the minister intervened and made an arrangement with the government for something called orders of supervision, whereby they could stay and work on a temporary basis. But unfortunately, late last year, the government reversed itself and decided to deport them, even in spite of the change in the Obama administration's policy in July, which instructed ICE to concentrate on deporting felons and not, non-criminal people. They were to exercise so-called prosecutorial discretion with these persons who had ties to the community, who had been here for a long time, who had American citizen children. So the minister authored very narrowly crafted and I think brilliant legislation, which has been introduced into Congress by Representatives Pallone and Maloney, that would allow these Indonesians who came here between the narrow window of 1997 to 2002, which was the height of the persecution over there, to refile asylum petitions if they had already filed them but just been turned down on the technicality of it being over the year, so that they could have their cases judged on the merits. So I have a copy of the bill, and I'm hoping it's H.R. 3590 that you might become a co-sponsor. And it sounds like, this is an issue that's very dear to your heart, and that you're very sympathetic to, and that perhaps you could talk about it with your colleagues in the Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus, and so that we could get more co-sponsors. The bill is now holed up in the Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Lamar Smith.
That's what I was going to say. There are examples very similar to that taking place across the nation. And, we could try the legislative route. Unfortunately, we don't have willingness in the House of Representatives to really advance legislation of that nature. We should also look at the Senate side, whether they would be willing to do a co-authoring, because it's my understanding that senators have much more of a chance of actually moving that type of legislation than do members of the House of Representatives. I have no problem with becoming a co-sponsor on that legislation, or taking it to, there's also, not only is there the CBC, there's the CHC, and there's also the caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and there's also the caucus of Asian South Pacific Islanders. So there are quite a lot of allies on the Hill that I mean, you can just go to the folks who passed the DREAM Act, and I think they would all understand and recognize the significance of working to help these immigrants. But there's so many cases. We have cases where, teachers or nurses were asked to come to the U.S. during a period of shortage, and then were brought on the wrong visas, and then these visas expire and they go through an annual renewal. It's a nightmare for these families, because they bring their children, and if their children have to go through the process with them, and if their children age out at a certain age, they are not in a position to be filed for. And so the longer that the system is broken, the likelihood of these children aging out becomes more and more present in their lives. So it's a broken system is a broken system, and it affects everyone equally.
Hi,
Yeah.
I have the
sorry.
microphone.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on that to say that the church is also providing sanctuary to 3 men at the moment. That makes this, what's happening in the Reformed Church of Highland Park, pretty unique at the moment. I'm here because I'm part of a group called the New Jersey Advocates for Immigrant Detainees, and I want to thank you for your comments about immigration detention.
Yes.
We just put out a report together with NYU. 2 law students drafted a report called Immigration Incarceration, the Expansion and Failed Reform of Immigration Detention in Essex County, New Jersey. I gave you a copy. So we have documented what's happened over the last year in terms of Essex County, the expansion that's gone on, and the fact that what ICE is doing is expanding first, and what we like to think of as reforming never, because really the improvements that we've seen in the 2 years since we issued our first report, Locked Up But Not Forgotten, about access into New Jersey detention centers, is really, we've seen very, very, very minimal improvements. And I mean, the county jails, we now have over 50% of the beds are in county jails. We went from around 1,600 detention beds in New Jersey to 2,350. So 750 beds were added in Essex County, and that in 25% of those beds are for New Yorkers. So New York City ICE is really, they only have Orange County Jail, otherwise everyone comes to New Jersey. And some of these facilities are Monmouth County Jail. It takes over an hour and a half to get there from New York. We have no, just, you can read the report, and anyone who wants to read it, it's on the afsc.org website. If you just search NYU, the report will come up. It was in the paper also 2 weeks ago. So we're looking for community oversight. ICE is resisting. We would love to have community input into what's happening in these detention facilities to the extent that we can't do as you're suggesting, which is end mandatory detention.
Well, you know, one of the challenges for us as a civil society is to determine whether we're for human rights or not, right? We got to really make up our minds. You know, you can't have it halfway. You know, for the conditions in these detention centers are not the same types of conditions that would be afforded to U.S. citizens. As a matter of fact, these folks are basically at the behest of whatever corporation is getting the money, right? So they can be treated any way. They have no judicial, there's no one to review it through the courts. They have no rights in the United States. So we've heard of some of the most egregious abuses that you ever want to hear about in these detention centers, because who are you going to call? You're getting ready to be deported. No attorney is going to touch your case at this stage. You're, 1 foot out the door, essentially. And sometimes people are held for years before they're even put on a plane back to their homes. So if it were like a quick thing, I think I don't know that anyone would really agree to that. But at the end of the day, at least it would be more humane. But when you have individuals stripped from their families and then sent to other states across the nation, oftentimes they're not left in the same state. And oftentimes you're talking about the breadwinners for those families. It's catastrophic all the way around. And this to me is a human rights issue. And we have to determine as Americans, is that what we stand for? Someone has the mic, is responsible. Oh, okay. Why don't we start over here and then work our way across? Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
It seems to me, and you said it in your remarks, that you're preaching here to the choir. And so my question is, given the political situation that we have now, and doesn't look like it's going to change even after the election, regardless of how it's going to be tenuous,
right,
one way or the other. So how do we move from where we are, which is not in a good place, to a place where I think I would agree with pretty much everything you said, to that place legislatively, because really that's the only way to do it. And the second part of my question is, there seems to be so much information about immigrants that is misinformation. You know,
Right.
they don't want to work, you know, they don't want to learn the language, they don't want to integrate, et cetera, et cetera. And my experience, basically, not personal experience, but through listening to people who know the data is there that disprove all that.
Of course.
So how do you get that out to the people who are on the other side and maybe convince them?
Well, you know, I think what has to happen is that, you know, people, irrespective of party affiliation, have to speak to their core values. And we've allowed folks, you know, to go unchallenged in the debate, basically. You know, there aren't enough of us. You know, all right, so let's give an example. So Newt Gingrich begins to talk about immigration reform during the Republican primary. And he talks about the wisdom of fixing the system. And then in the midst of it all, because of the furor, he does a total, you know, about face on it. This is a man who, you know, has a whole bunch of stuff going on, but at least, you know, he's, you know, at least he had a rational argument to give. And there weren't enough of us who say, you know what, I don't agree with everything Newt Gingrich, or anything Newt Gingrich says, wherever you are in the spectrum, but I do agree with this. There was no one to really say that. All right? You know, we have to be willing to point out where we agree. Because if we don't point out where we agree, then people assume that there's total disagreement. And that's the problem in Washington right now. People don't want to point out where they agree for whatever reasons, and it's unfortunate. I think that where we go from here is that, you know, you have those conversations, set up your, you know, your chats and, you know, online, whomever you interact with, you question people around you. Maybe it's your children or your grandchildren. How do you feel about immigration reform? Would you be willing to sign a petition saying it's time to fix the system? You know, even if we can get people to agree that it's time to fix the system, then we're part of the way there. It's not, everyone's not going to agree on how we fix the system, but just that it needs to be fixed is very important.
I'll take a question from this side.
Okay. So we'll alternate sides, and then the middle. Okay.
Hi. I was just wondering, like, okay. Why has there become, like, such a big opposition to immigration in the past decade? Like, why has this become such a problem amongst people and in the government?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. Our nation goes through ebbs and flows of xenophobia. It happens occasionally throughout history. You'll see it. And, you know, we all desire an enlightened civil society. And it's important that those who are enlightened around the issue of immigration reform, because our nation is a democracy, that our voices are constantly out there. Because there's this tendency to digress every now and then. And I think that some folks, again, are motivated by fear. And fear has people do some wacky things. Things that are not always in their best interest or the best interest of anyone. People are looking at demographics. Let's just put it as it is. And because the nation was built on immigration, depending on where people come from, how many visas are allocated at a particular time, that's how you get the mix of people that are in the country. Because it's a nation built on immigration. So, you know, over time, you know, people are like, well, how do we make the right mix? Well, we make the right mix with who we have at the current time. And each generation will build and build and build from there. But I think it's just the fear of the changing demographics of the nation that some people have. Fear of, you know, who's that neighbor? You know, we don't do the neighbor thing as well as we used to. where you actually know your neighbors. So it's a lot easier to point to that person and say, oh, they're different, I think they got issues, than it is to say, hi, welcome to the neighborhood, here's the apple pie, right?
May I just add to something to what you said?
Sure.
I believe it was 911 that caused this. I don't believe it's ebb and flow and changing opinions. I believe people just were scared after that when they saw all those foreigners having come in and shut down our buildings. I believe this is when it really solidified into such a tremendous dislike of immigrants and new immigrants. So they're all scared.
It's fair, but you remember Pearl Harbor? Remember what happened after that? We rounded up every Japanese person, and even if you weren't Japanese, you could have been Korean. You would still be put in that camp. So there are some ebb and flows to it, and it is a reaction oftentimes. But I'd say with immigration reform, it was being fermented because the people who are being stigmatized the most around immigration were not of the same background as the individuals who flew into the World Trade Center.
It's the Gingrich who feeds into this sentiment.
Yeah.
That's why he was scared when he saw the reaction to the original.
Oh, yes. I agree.
Scared to go on it.
I agree.
Congressman Clarke,
Yes.
I want to compliment you as being one of the leaders in immigration reform.
Thank you.
I want to bring something to the attention of the younger people here. I think you're a pace setter, and I'm all for everything that you've done in immigration reform. For a number of years, I taught in a college in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, and I'm very familiar with immigrants and what they've accomplished and contributed to this country. I'm retired now, but my parents, a lot of the younger people may not be aware of this, who came from Eastern Europe in the 20s. There was a immigration act that was discriminatory against people who were Catholic and Jewish who came from Eastern Europe. Didn't mention Catholic, it didn't mention Jewish, it was a quota system. And these people, some of them like my parents, had to go to Cuba before they came into this country as legal residents.
Right.
So I'm well aware of what you've done, and you've done a great thing by bringing this to the attention of people who have this phobia. But one of the things that concerns me, and you may want to address this with the Labor Secretary, it's something that the Obama administration has to get on top of. It's not so much the legal immigrants that are coming in from different professions. It's some of the large corporations, as you may know, are giving preference and are sponsoring H-1B visas for people who are competing against, and this I know for a fact, African American and white, Hispanic, American citizens, middle-aged, men and women between 45 and 60 who cannot get jobs. And I think we have to address the H-1B visa program because the overflow of these immigrants is really challenging the ability of some people in down economic times. Even though I'm for everything that you're doing, and I support everything you're doing, I think there is a problem when large corporations are sponsoring H-1B visas into this country. One of the men who's running for the Republican nomination for president over the years in companies that he's taken over has sponsored H-1B visa applicants. And these people are competing with African Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and this has to be addressed. And I'd like your comments on this.
It's challenging. How do you strike the right balance? Now, corporations are saying we can't find people with the talents. That's their rationale. There's a skills deficit in the United States, and they need individuals who, first of all, have this capacity, and two, who are freshly minted out of the educational systems of whatever nation they may be from, or even from the U.S. That these are the individuals who are most poised to go into their corporations and make things happen, particularly in the high-tech sector they talk about most of the time. So, there's a lot of legislation on the Hill to try to marry some of these corporations with our community college system, particularly our technical and trades, so that wherever skills are transferable, we can begin to get, folks who are looking for opportunities, who may just need a tweaking of one skill or another to be looked upon as a potential candidate. That is part of the challenge, is how do we strike the balance, and how do we get the reinvestment of corporate America, instead of throwing their hands up, knowing they need it now, making the investment so that it pays dividends later.
Mm-hmm. You know, me being a social worker, mm-hmm. and being involved in outreach community services and assigned to work with children and families, I cannot help but focus my attention. Whenever I hear the word immigration, I can't help but think about human trafficking.
Right.
How much human trafficking plays. It's a major impact when it deals with immigration. And I think it's just so important for people who are sincere and passionate to get together about putting together policies that will govern immigrants so that they may benefit from it. You know, one of the things I know to be we are lacking is not too many of us are aware of how many of our immigrants are caught into human trafficking. You know, both young and old, mm-hmm. men and women. You know, we're talking from babies up who are forced to perform and live a lifestyle only to make it because of the roadblocks, you know, those things that are put in place that hinders them. Mm-hmm. So what can we do about that, you know?
So that's a subset of what we're talking about, because human trafficking is a human issue. So you can be born in the United States and get trafficked, you know, particularly in impoverished communities. It's happening a lot, actually. That's not to make any excuse, but it's a subset of what's happening globally, because we're part of a global supply chain. It's not just for the United States, but there's also an outflow from the United States. We don't have all these missing children for no good reason. These are, you know, things that there are already laws on the books for. But I go back to one of my basic premises, which is we don't know our neighbors anymore. We don't care to know our neighbors anymore. And we're afraid to know who our neighbors are now. You may have one incident where that person just didn't look at you right, or that person didn't say good morning to you. So you go on for years not saying good morning to the person that lives right next door to you. You don't know who they are. You don't know what's happening in the household. There was a time when, and it wasn't that long ago because it was during my time, and I'm not that old. It's all relative. It's all relative. But, you know, my neighbors reinforced the values that my parents had for me. So if I was going in the wrong direction to school, there was a neighbor that would stand in my way and say, I know your parents didn't send you to school this way. Don't let me have to tell them. You know, there was someone that reinforced those values. Today, we see kids going the wrong way. We're scared to say anything to them because we're afraid their parents may have, you know, some four-letter words for us. Well, you know what? That's how you know who's around you. That's how you get rid of all the paranoia. Because we are really living in a state of paranoia to a large extent because we don't know who our neighbors are anymore. And if we could just break down those barriers, then a child crying would mean something to us, something more than just a child crying in a house that we don't know. A person worried or walking around with their hands wringing would mean something to us, and we would know what to do to help that person. All of these things, these signals that we get would mean something to us. Someone's mentally off or about to break. We would know because we would have interacted with that individual and we would have seen the change in behavior. We would be able to suggest to a family member, this is how you can be relieved of this particular issue or problem or challenge that you're facing in your household. We don't do those things anymore. And it's unfortunate because that's how these types of abuses thrive. They thrive because of the anonymity of it all. I mean, if you have a home that's built for a family of 4 and you see 18 people every day in and out of that house, something's wrong. Something is wrong. You know, unless, you know, they've converted it to a hostel or something and you didn't know about it.
Congresswoman, thank you for coming here. First, a disclaimer, I am an immigration attorney and have been for 40 years.
Okay.
With regard to the H-1B, I'd be glad to debate that with you separately. There are some minor abuses, but for every H-1B, empirical economic studies show that there's 4 U.S. workers' jobs created. So, and a lot of stuff has been offshored because we can't get enough of the science and technology. Over 50% of our graduate schools now are foreign nationals. We can't get Americans to go into science and technology. Not my point, first of all. The Republicans have introduced the DREAM Act. I have not had a chance to read it. You were talking earlier about the divide in Congress, and nobody wants to agree. No Democrat wants to agree with Republican. Obviously, you know, no Republican wants to agree with a Democrat. Have you had a chance to look at the act? And
I don't think I don't think that it's moved yet, because they certainly have not come to ask for co-sponsorship of it. As a matter of fact, this is the first time. Do you know who it's introduced by?
I just read about it about 2 weeks ago.
I'll look into it when I get back to D.C. That's interesting.
I heard the Democratic leadership said it's, as far as they're concerned, it's dead on arrival, and the question was, is it just because it was introduced
by
Republicans, or is it that bad?
And you know, when we all become cynical. It's like, unfortunately, there's always a poison pill somewhere. So, you know, I don't have a problem with checking it out, because if it can move the ball down the field, then I'm about that. I'm not an obstructionist, but if it has some sort of crazy zing to it, then that would probably be why. Yeah. Who's the mic?
Hi. Sorry, over here.
Oh, okay.
Hi. So I have a question. A lot of the things that you have been talking about seem to deal with what we do about the immigrants that are already in our country. But, you know, when you talk about fixing the system, you know, I think about the visa system and how, you know, you go about changing that to maybe more appropriately reflect demand and how that's different among countries. And I was wondering if you could give me your thoughts on that. And also, one of the things about the visa system that I find interesting is I've read a lot of people who have suggested that we should sort of be using the visa system to sort of pick the kinds of immigrants that we want in our country.
Right.
So from my understanding, it seems like there's mostly a family-based system. And so I've read some people that have been saying, you know, if we want to really use immigration to create a more productive economy, that we should be granting those visas based more on employment as opposed to the family-based system. So I was wondering if you could give me your thoughts on that, as well as some overall thoughts on how to go about
You're
doing
right.
that.
Comprehensive immigration reform must include the visa system. And that becomes a little bit trickier, right? I think that family reunification has always got to be a part of whatever we do, wherever that falls in the continuum of visas and ability to adjust your status based on the type of visa you have. That's a much more complicated issue. I don't believe that we can use any subjective measure to make that determination. I think that if there are going to be classifications, then it has to be among all of the visa classes. I don't think you can make a preference of one visa class over another. I know that some people believe that you can predetermine someone's productivity based on, most entrepreneurs don't show what they can do until they do it. So, and most entrepreneurs are what create our corporate infrastructure in the United States. No one knew that, when Bill Gates left Harvard, that he was going to blow up into Microsoft. Most people would have said, oh, he's just going to be, a drug head somewhere, right? Yes.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Sorry.
Thank you for coming to New Jersey, Congresswoman.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you to please elaborate a bit on secure communities. I understand that it has become formally and officially on February 12th of this year, New Jersey has become a secure community. In addition to that all states in this nation will be a secure community by 2013. This has not just implications for the undocumented as well. It has implications for legal permanent residents. It has direct and already active implications for the judiciary, where every municipal, every courtroom must announce in their opening remarks that if you are undocumented or a legal permanent resident and you plead guilty to anything, we're referring you to ICE, et cetera, et cetera. What amazes me completely, and I've been an advocate for a long time, is that this was the most silent occurrence in this state that I've ever seen in my life. Please describe its implications for New Jersey as well as the country, and if there is any possible opportunities for compromise because of an upcoming election. Thank you very much again for coming.
Okay, so let me start with your first question last. There's always an opportunity for compromise when an election is coming up. Always. But having said that, New York State tried to opt out of secure communities. Tried was the operative word. They weren't permitted to opt out. This is the Patriot Act's brother. This is basically the Patriot Act's brother. And, listen, I'm from New York. My father worked for the Port Authority, okay? My father was one of the architects. He was actually a civil engineer who built the World Trade Center. I used to visit it as a child on a regular basis because he was an employee of the Port Authority. My father lost so many of his colleagues. We were just going to funeral after funeral after funeral. So I get, how we all feel lost, the need for the feeling of safety. But we have to be much smarter than we are right now. I mean, the way that we are going about securing ourselves is actually such a false sense of security. It's not funny. It's going to be until the next really crazy, heinous crime happens of the least likely suspect, then we'll be rounding up all of them and their family. We've got to become much smarter. And I think that what we're doing is breeding resentment, actually. And it may not be the likely suspects, but the likely suspect's grandchild that will be the one who wants to seek revenge. And I think that there's a much more humane way to deal with the safety and security. I'm on Homeland Security, so I mean to keep our nation safe. But at the same time, I don't think we need to forfeit our humanity as a nation, the civil liberties of human beings, in order to achieve a safe nation. So that's my perspective. I think that we need to look at secure communities and legislation that will, it's actually just a rule. So we need to take a look at that. Oh, wow.
No, we have actually 1, 2, and then we have to wrap it up so that the member can get to her next event. I'm really, really sorry.
Bob's had his hand up here.
Yes, he has. He's had his hand up. So, okay. So.
Sure. Oh, there's no mic. Sorry.
Yeah.
Coming back to your turnstile jumper.
Yes.
It goes beyond deportation, I think, because with the increasing number of businesses, particularly in the food industry, that are using E-Verify.
Right.
That fellow's going to get caught up when he goes to get a job as a waiter or even a busboy. But beyond that, I also wonder if there's any knowledge as to how accurate E-Verify is, because it can stop people who are clean
right
from getting jobs. Do you have any comment on that?
The statistical data has not come in yet around any false positives in E-Verify, or the numbers, not any, the numbers. But we will certainly be taking a look at that as well, because clearly there are going to be false positives. I mean, just the fact that, someone may have I passed a piece of legislation in the House called the Fast Redress Act, right? So the Fast Redress Act were for people who were getting constantly stopped by TSA because their name was the same as someone else's. And I'm like, we can't stop every Muhammad that's going to walk through here, because there's about 100 Muhammads being born a minute. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we got to get smarter. And so I developed a bill that, I'm just being honest. I mean, Muhammad is like Michael, right? In our, much more common, right? As a first name and a last name. So, it got to a point where we didn't know who we would, and people were just going through nightmares. Same thing with E-Verify after a certain point. They're definitely going to be false positives, and it's going to, lives are being devastated as a result of us not having a fine system. I know. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. But again, the Supreme Court says it's okay to strip search people. Crickets. Crickets in America. No one has said anything. No one has said anything. This is John Stewart. But this is America, and you would have thought there would have been an uproar over this. And, crickets. Yes?
She doesn't order.
Oh, okay,
Hi, how are you?
I'm so used to that. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Sure.
I'm a student here at Rutgers. I'm a current senior. I'm graduating this May.
Woohoo!
I'm a first-generation graduate. I'm also Latina, born in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I was one of the candidates for the DREAM Act. I am going to graduate. I'm a resident now. I am very proud of that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
But I am actually writing my senior thesis on the DREAM Act. And I've worked for a congressman in Massachusetts, where I used to reside, a former Congressman Marty Meehan. And I've been working on the DREAM Act and trying to get it passed for, I'm 26, getting passed for around 10 years. There's no movement that I see, with the DREAM Act. There's little changes, but what people need to understand is you want these, I'm not the best, but you want type of people like me that are going to, really help this country. And, we're not getting any support. We're not getting any help. I couldn't take, I got a scholarship. I couldn't take it.
Right.
It's sad. And, we're the people who are going to boost up the community and boost up, the country and taxes. We pay taxes. I pay taxes when I wasn't legal. And people don't know that. And what can I do, or what can we do to really help the DREAM Act pass? Because it's been going on for so long, and I don't see any movement.
Well, that's just it. It's always dark just before the light. You got to keep pushing. We got to keep, we got to keep on it. If we allow, our passiveness to rule, then we won't get there. I think the best spokespersons for the DREAM Act are students. And students have been responsible for some of the major mass movement and enlightenment in this nation. Students need to make it go viral. Listen, you can't compare things, right? But you find students who are passionate about child soldiers across this nation. And we don't have child soldiers here. Not to say that we can't multitask and be as, angry about that and want to be activists around that. But why aren't we activists around DREAM Act kids? when these are kids we grow up with, kids we go to college with, kids who are next door neighbors. We got to make this as passionate an issue for the student who was born in the United States as it is for the student who wasn't. And I think that that will keep it going because you got youth on your side.
So, Congresswoman,
yes.
Thank you so
Janice,
so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.